We have a little jet lag.
I finally feel as productive as I want to feel. I wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm not tired and I'm ready to go. That's my favorite part of the jet lag. Feeling like I'm going to crash at 8 o'clock, not my favorite.
We were all in bed before 7 p.m.
7.
last night, even our kids, which is unheard of because they are vampires and they love to stay up late and yeah,
Party animals.
party animals. Okay, so the reason we have jet lag is because we just got back from a 10-day pretty epic trip. It was part retreat, part vacation, very fun. We I think we ask a lot of our children because we took them on a red eye, followed by a 5-hour train ride, and only like a mild meltdown for any one of us, which was great. But we spent some time on the coast of Wales, which is honestly one of the most beautiful places on earth that I have ever seen. It was really special. We got to reconnect with some folks that Steve has known for a long time, me less so. And I remember walking, we did this one particular hike, which was probably one of my most favorite days,
It's unbelievable.
where we got dropped off in these little mini buses that they had on a beach. And I spent about an hour rock hunting with my son while Steve and our daughter were kind of like off wandering around and climbing the little cliffs. And then we walked from, wait, was that the beach day?
Yeah, it was the Wales Coastal Path.
Yeah, so we walked from that beach. There was another beach day that was like very windy and rainy, and we didn't stay for very long. But that beach day, we ended up going up this nice long, kind of scary. I was like a little, I'm not a big heights person, and we have some
Cliffs.
big drops, but we walked for a while to this other beach that you had to take all of these stairs down to. And we got to bathe in the healing waters of the Celtic Sea, which I will never forget. It was like one of the most fun things. Very cold, but
But not
very,
as cold as we were ready for it to
yeah,
be. Like we were
yeah.
ready for it to be, iceberg cold.
It was
I
so
was able
fun.
to swim, like swim. It wasn't like the kind of shocking cold plunge cold that I've experienced before.
Yeah, no,
Healing,
it was healing. It was
healing
refreshing.
waters.
And then we continued on this like again, very beautiful but very steep hike down to this cute little coastal town. We hung out at the pub with like there were probably 30 or 40 of the people from the retreat
Drank some
that were
Welsh
there.
whiskey.
Yeah,
Welsh whiskey. I was like, "Do you have any scotch?" And like, "Scotch? You know we're in Wales, right? We got some Welsh whiskey."
I drank that. Steve didn't
I had a
drink that.
sip.
You had a sip.
It was
Yeah,
yummy.
Steve doesn't really drink. Um, but I did. It was quite fun. But as we were walking that particular day, I had this sort of insight, even though it was nothing like any other retreat I've ever been on. Oh, we've got some very squawky birds in the background. Um, I had this insight that there is different fuel that we can use for achieving amazing things. So even on something like a coastal walk, there's a way of doing that where you could be very concerned with your speed and you could really like get your arms pumping and be really stressed out and tense as you're walking. But there's also the chance to do that walk as a bit more of a stroll with a bit more relaxation, with like taking time to stop and look around, take in the air, take in the sunshine. And it's something where I every so often will kind of do these internal experiments. If you've listened to the podcast for any length of time, you know that one of my experiments a few years ago was figuring out how to work and have the same amount of impact or more impact, but only be actually at my desk for 25 to 30 hours a week. That took a lot of internal work to figure out. Another experiment that I've talked about here on the show before is seeing if I could really have self-worth in a way that didn't feel fake or forced, and that actually informed how I run my business and how I live my life.
You're on a roll.
Okay, I just want to make sure. I thought you had something to say.
No, I'm just on for the ride right
Okay,
now.
good, good. Steve is here, everybody. But the kind of internal experiment that sort of came to me on this walk that we were doing was, I wonder if it's possible to, I hesitate to say eliminate pressure, but to still get amazing results in my life and in my work without using pressure as the fuel. So as magnificent as this trip was, I used to be a tour manager. So I am very used to like going chop, chop, time to get to the airport, everybody. Make sure all the things are packed. I can get very stressed before I travel with other people because um, I have a history of like people forgetting passports and forgetting instruments and just I just have a kind of an association with travel as being somewhat stressful because my job really depended on everybody and all their things getting where they needed to go and being on time. And that was my life as a tour manager at one point. So it was really interesting to just think about like how much more enjoyment, how much more achievement could there be with less pressure?
And one thing really stood out for me as we were just recounting the story of the walk. It's almost as though the walk itself and the presence of the beach pulled us along. The itinerary set out for us that, at the end of it, there will be this coastal town and there will be some cute pubs there and we're just going to hang out. Like the walking happened almost because of those things. Like I didn't feel as though I was putting forth the effort to complete this walk. And the children also did not. Like this was a long one and they were just in it. There was a moment early on, we saw the sign, it said Wales Coastal Path. And our daughter, Audrey, she's 8, she looked at me, she says, "What a stunning name." And I looked at her, and I'm like, "You're 8. How do you say things like that?" My actual words were, "Did you get that from all the books you read?" And she looks at me and goes, "Duh." After I reprimanded her, I said that was actually really funny. But I share that because it's almost as though the setting, the context in which the effort took place contained the effort so fully that the walk matched the experience, right? The walk was simply filling up the experience. And when I think about achievement without pressure, what comes to mind is your vision is something so stunning that the effort simply rises to meet that possibility.
It's funny you mentioned our daughter because at some point on the walk, our son, you weren't with us at this point. We were kind of walking on our own. It was a really long walk.
Ahead of me. They were walking ahead.
Yeah,
They were
way ahead of
smoking
you.
me.
Yeah.
They were that fast.
You were
which
taking
never
pictures and stuff. Yeah, that never has happened before. But he was walking up this hill and he said, "Mommy, this is like your book. This is like the mountain in your book where you're like climbing this mountain," which is a story in our book that's kind of weaved throughout. In our book, it's actually a nighttime hike. And it's a little more treacherous than the Wales coastal walk. But it was really funny that he was like having that same association, as was I, about the way that I think kind of makes the super round way method, however, sounds silly, but what kind of sets this apart from the way that most people achieve, the way most people achieve is you pick a goal and then you get very tense and you're very one-pointed and very focused. And it's an emotional roller coaster because you're working on it one day and you're really inspired. And then the next day you're tired and everything sucks and you get rejected and something horrible happens and you've got to like amp yourself up. It's like this big roller coaster ride where you're constantly filled with like emotional highs and lows, and it's tense, tense, tense. And then you get to this place where you achieved the thing that you were trying to achieve. And it often, for many people, I've shared this before because this is how I used to work, feels very empty, feels very devoid of celebration and life. And, you know, like there's an essential spirit that's missing when you achieve it, because the route you took was so tense and awful, and you didn't really allow yourself to be pulled by the lantern or the vision. You really muscled your way through, and you probably threw some bowling balls in your backpack to walk with, just to make it harder for the sake of it being hard.
There are no extra points for extra struggle. And yet we
Sorry.
feel that for something to be worthwhile, we have to sacrifice, we have to struggle, we got to cut things out, we got to really knuckle down. And that's the pressure that we're talking about with kind of the usual way of achieving things. And I think what's powerful about this topic, achievement without pressure, is not so much listen to the answers that we have, is more the question, what would it look like in your life to ease off on the pressure and yet rise to that achievement even more fully?
Sometimes when I've suggested this to clients, where I will say, okay, you're using the fuel that you're using to work towards your next lantern is pressure. Is there any other fuel available? Sometimes it can actually feel a little bit threatening, because people feel like if I take the pressure away, there will be nothing to hold me accountable. There will be nothing to push me forward. And I get that. I actually really, really understand that. I've watched so many people try to do some of the things that I've done, like write books. I have a friend who has been working on their book for, I mean, this is going to be my fourth book that we're publishing, and they're not even finished the rough draft of their first book that we've been talking about for a really long time. And that's not a judgment on them, but there's like no pressure. There's no positive pressure for them to finish it. Therefore, it's not finished. I don't think, though, that that means that pressure is the only fuel. I think if there was a really clear intention or a really clear lantern to be lit by that person finishing that book, it would be out. It would be out, and it would probably be like a bestseller all over the world, because this is a really brilliant person. We all know how to do things under pressure. And so what I want to be careful about is saying, like, this isn't like, oh, never have pressure ever again, because sometimes pressure is really helpful. It's just finding other sources of fuel so that pressure isn't the only one that you're using. Most of us have mastered getting things done at the last minute. Procrastination is a word we all know. And sometimes the pressure of a deadline is the thing that gets you to the end goal. But it doesn't feel good for everyone. I know some people who like work really well in that last minute period of time, and they are totally, their nervous systems can handle it and they're good. But if that's the only way you know how to achieve, that can just be hard on you.
I want to talk for a moment about creativity and the state in which the best creativity emerges. If you just reflect on your own experiences of insight, of, whoa, where did that come from? I doubt you'll find very many where you were kind of in the pressure cooker. They tend to happen, you know, all the stories of breakthroughs happening in the shower when you're just relaxed and there's nothing going on, but you've been putting in the work and suddenly an idea sparks. Or in a quiet morning meditation, or on a walk, there's some element of relaxation, maybe even some element of play. I love to ride my bike. There's some element of just the world drops away. You just kind of you're in the moment. And that sense of freedom, of play is a powerful source for the kinds of things that will lead to the biggest achievements. There's definitely room for like the buckle down and get it done. Like if you don't execute, something's never going to cross the finish line. But when you're deciding what it is that you want to take over the finish line, that's often a space for that creativity, for connection with possibility. In fact, when you asked what are some other fuels besides pressure, the question, what is possible, came to mind. And so the fuel of what's possible for me, what's possible in my life, what can I create with people I love, what can I create to impact people? All of those can be fuel for you to play with, right? You don't know what's going to be your greatest source of fuel. And so I encourage you to play with all of those things, with possibility, with impact, with vision, with relationship.
Yeah, even if you're highly trained to function well under pressure, because there's plenty of people who are. If you're a leader, you probably know how to get creative when there's no other option and when you're feeling immense pressure. But I want to actually open this up to kind of like a personal experiment. I usually kind of do these things on my own and then report back when I figure out what happened for me. But for the first time, I actually have decided that I want to open this up to more people in more of a collaborative way. And the place we're going to do that is inside the Superabound Life membership, which is our ultra low cost membership that includes all of the things we love: yoga, meditation, magic. You don't have to be into any of those things. You might be into all of those things. We do visionary working sessions. We infuse different ideas from the Superabound method into classes. It's less of us coaching and more of us teaching and in collaboration. And that kind of feels like the perfect space to go on this adventure of having a low pressure. I'm not going to say no pressure, because sometimes we're going to use pressure in our lives. It's totally fine to use. We're not excluding any part of ourselves, but to find out what happens when the primary fuel that we're looking for the next month, maybe 2 months if you love it, is not pressure. We're not going to use pressure as the first option. And I'm going to be sharing the ups and downs of that. I'm going to be sharing some of the practices that I will be using to invite other sources of fuel in, with a really specific goal of lighting important lanterns. So if you've never heard this podcast before, a lantern really is a goal with soul, a goal that is important to you and not something that's been prescribed to you by someone else or by your culture or by the expectations of your peers. It is something that is actually very personally meaningful that you have chosen, and that is in line with your big vision for your life, the legacy, let's say, that you want to leave behind. So I'm going to find out, and hopefully you'll join me to find out. We're going to be talking a lot about this over the next month inside the membership. How do we achieve the things that are important? How do we light important lanterns without using pressure as the primary fuel? And Steve was like, so you mean kind of, we were talking about this earlier, you said, so kind of like using flow. And I would love for you to explain what you mean by that, because I've heard that before. I think I know what that means, but you already seem to sort of naturally do this in a lot of areas of your life. So maybe you can give us some tips but
Yeah,
how we can achieve without pressure and tension and strain.
for sure. Just to follow up before I do, the Superabound
Oh, yeah.
Life membership is available at besuperabound.com/life.
And it's a monthly membership. You can come and go as you please. There is no pressure or hassle. If you just kind of like this experiment, but you're not interested in anything else in there, then just come. You can join for a month and leave whenever you want to. Just make sure you cancel.
No hard feelings, but we'd love to
We
see
hope
you.
you'll love it, though. We hope you'll stay and do yoga and meditate with us and ask for classes that you want, because I love to co-create this with the members in there.
So there is a whole body of work on flow, and it's important for doing work in a way that you love it and finding your own uh, playful approach to doing important things. And so some of the criteria for flow are that you have mastery up to a certain point. Like if we kind of put it on a X and Y axis, we have mastery and difficulty. So mastery on one side and difficulty on the other. And if the task at hand is high in difficulty and you are low in mastery, that will not result in a flow state. That will be frustration because it will feel too hard for you. And if the task at hand is lower in difficulty than you have in mastery, it will be somewhat boring because you just have a lot more to give than what the moment is asking of you. And finally, the last quadrant there before we get to flow is if it's low difficulty and low mastery, then it's just there's nothing really to be done. It doesn't need any kind of specialized power to achieve. So there's very little room for engagement there. So flow happens in that sweet spot where the difficulty is high and your mastery of that area is high. So as we think about achievement without pressure, putting something in front of you is selecting a lantern where it requires a lot from you in an area that you love and that you really have invested in, something that you feel a level of mastery with. If you are a coach, then that would be, something around finding your own edge with your coaching. Maybe it's creating a workshop, creating a new way for people to experience the work that you do. If you are a leader, maybe that thing that calls upon your mastery is setting a new objective for the team or creating a new way for your team to upskill, right? So it's finding that place that feels a bit scary because it's going to ask a lot of what you have to offer, but you also know that it means a lot to you, that engaging in that work will require your whole focus, your whole attention, your whole body, mind, and spirit, which means your chance of sort of falling into flow will be significant. It's not something that you can turn on like a switch, but when you show up for something in the right conditions, then that flow can occur. My own experience of this was in writing our book. There were several occasions where new ideas were crystallized, new tools sort of emerged from the writing process that never would have been there had I and we not set out to say, okay, we're writing a book. That was the high difficulty, high mastery thing. It's like, okay, we've done a lot in this space. We have a lot to give. Let's put it into a book, folks. And that process of showing up for it day after day, putting ourselves in that container that asked a lot from us, but also drew upon everything that we had to give, yielded many instances of flow, many instances of creativity that, while not always pleasant to put the whole book together, resulted in something that we're both really proud of and mostly happened without pressure, right? It was there as an act of love. It was there as an act of contribution, service, and purpose.
I love that. It's interesting because I've never kind of, the way you're talking about it is like, there's a certain like there's an awakefulness. You're awake, you're awake and attentive. Sometimes I think people talk about flow and they think it's more like an autopilot. They're like, oh, I was in a flow state. I wasn't really aware of all the things. But the way that you're talking about it, I really love because there's like a quality of attention that has like some spirit to it. And that's different than than the kind of the other extremes, which would not extremes, but the other like points that I think are sort of close to that, which is like one is autopilot, when you're just doing something you know how to do. Like I'm driving down the street to the same place I always drive to. That's not
on the right hand of the road.
Yes, Steve had to be very attentive to his driving.
On the left side of the road.
Yeah, that was not a flow state for anybody. It was a lot of but we were away. But then there's this other kind of little tipping point on the other side of that where you're awake, but there's tension, there's pressure. And I think many of us are able to kind of dive right into the pressure fueled wakefulness and drop into the autopilot doing. And it's sort of like flow is like the in between. So you are probably very familiar with both of those pieces that are just a few degrees away from this. Flow is being awake, being immersed, but not having tension or pressure be the primary fuel. I definitely relate to what you said. I used to have this a lot when I was teaching yoga. Even though, I felt like I was a master of teaching yoga. I taught a lot of yoga. I was pretty good at teaching yoga, at least in the style and form that I taught, which I still do in our membership. But there was always a little bit of an edge because I made it a practice, a spiritual practice of never pre-planning my classes. I would have a playlist, and I committed as a spiritual practice to teaching to who showed up, teaching organically to who was in the room, what the energy felt like to me, what my students needed. I was lucky enough to know a lot of my students and know a lot about what was happening in their lives and their bodies. So there was always kind of a sense before teaching of like, I don't know what's going to happen. I know what time we start. I know what time we end. I know there will be Shavasana. There will be 10 minutes of rest. And I know what songs are on this playlist, but that's all I know. And I know how to teach yoga. But there is almost like a deep trust. We talked about trust on the podcast last week, but like it's an inner trust of your own mastery and a willingness to accept what's coming in from the universe, whatever that means to you, however you see it, totally great. But I feel like this achieving without pressure is going to rely on our trust of the universe to come in and do its part, even as we, of course, are participating, but there has to be some expectation that magic comes in.
Mm-hmm. And that's right at the heart of this topic. There was a moment while we were away. One of the places we visited was the Chalice Well in Glastonbury. Very special place.
Not
So
in Wales,
beautiful.
when we went from Wales to England.
And absolutely magical. Just several places where we visited were around springs that were bubbling up from the earth, just natural wells that people had been coming to and seeing the sacredness in for hundreds, if not thousands of years in some cases. And I was sitting on this bench, and there was a little angel statue behind me. It was called the Angel Bench, I believe, or the Angel Chair or something, Angel Seat.
Angel seat. Yeah.
Angel Seat. And it was covered by greenery. There was some kind of a vine, something was growing that created an overhang, and it even hung sort of in front of your face. So you were very covered. You felt embraced. You felt the embrace of the angel seat. And I was sitting there meditating, and I thought for a moment, just pay attention. What magic is happening now? I was actually thinking about the name of our business, the name of our book, Superabound. It's like, where is the superabundance of the universe right now in this moment? And I looked at the greenery that was above me, and I thought about the work that it took from the gardeners to have not just this one seat, but the entire space as beautiful as it was. And how connected my chair right there was to not just this moment, but throughout history. I was just kind of overwhelmed by the connectedness of it all. But it was very location specific, right? The magic wasn't, oh, gardeners, oh, I'm supported in so many ways. It was, this vine here was cared for by a person who said, we need a vine over this place with an angel and a concrete stone. Like, it was very specific to that moment, the magic that I was present to. And there's magic in your life right now that is very specific to what has come before. And tuning into what achievement without pressure for you is going to look like pulling on those threads of magic, amplifying those things that are already at play, and what friends of ours, was it Carter Phipps? It might maybe he's the one who introduced it to me. It called the adjacent possible, right? So yes, anything is possible, but some things are more closely possible than others, and there's a lot of them. And so achievement without pressure is going to look like not only what are the threads, but what are those threads pointing to that will make possible in your world towards your next lantern.
So achieving without pressure requires trust, requires reflecting on everything that you just said. It was very beautiful. And we're going to see what happens over this next period of time. I have no doubt it will be very magical because it's collaborative, because it's a collaboration between your effort and your highest vision and your future self and your past self and the universe. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen. If you have a sense that learning how to light lanterns in your life without using pressure as the primary fuel, you want to have a pressureless or pressure-free experience, come join us inside your the Superabound life at besuperabound.com/life. And let's see what we can create using less pressure, more trust, more flow. And we'll talk to you again soon.